Fish Stark is executive director of the American Humanist Association, we say the AHA. He's also an organizer, educator, social entrepreneur, and lifelong humanist. Fish has spent his career turning big ideas into bold action in service of belonging, flourishing, and social justice for all people. Prior to joining the AHA as executive director, Fish was the head of program and curriculum at Legends, an educational technology startup where he had led research and implementation teams to create products that help children build self-confidence, positive mental health, and critical thinking skills. These are all very, very important. And I know that you had a conversation with Angel, so you know how important it is for us here too. Fish's other professional experiences include managing progressive political campaigns, leading a mentorship program in the West Virginia coalfields with the American Friends Service Committee, building a nationally recognized peer-to-peer bullying prevention program, and teaching students from preschool to high school. He lives in Annapolis, Maryland, where he's president of the Speaker Mike Bush President 30 Democratic Club. It's a mouthful. And a member of the Unitarian Universalist Church in Annapolis, and serves on several nonprofit boards. And this might surprise you, he moonlights as an award-winning stand-up comedian and has performed in 13 states. Okay, maybe we'll hear some of that during this interview, I don't know. Okay, come on up. Let's move these chairs. Why don't you take that mic and this one?
Adjust it from guitar height.
And,
Thank you.
thank you. Okay, then I think what I will do is use this one. Okay. Yeah, great. Terrific. We put our speakers to work. And she's asking for help. Thank you. Thank you, Daniel. Okay. So welcome to Brooklyn Ethical.
Thank you for having me.
I've been looking forward to this, and so have our members. My daughter, who also works for the AHA, sent some literature. So we've been able to replenish at our readers table there. So we'll have some literature there. So first of all, I know that you all want to know what I wanted to know. Explain fish. What's with the name?
I get this question a lot, and it's a little bit funny because I feel like you've never been asked to explain why you're named Anne. No. But I get it. It's a strange name, and people have questions about strange things, as they should. My given name, as you might imagine, is not Fish. And for those of you who knew my father, Pete Stark, his given name wasn't Pete either. So my given name, like his, is Fortney Hillman Stark III. You know how some names just sound Republican? Have you ever met a person with 3 last names and a Roman numeral who was like, oh yes, I'm giving my share of Papa's estate to the Ethical Culture Society. Anyway, so that was my father, Fortney Hillman Stark Jr., never used the name. He went by Pete his whole life, the damn traitor. And when he had his firstborn son, he named him Jeffrey. I have an older half brother named Jeffrey. But when I came along, maybe he wanted to teach me that there was pain and suffering in life. And so I had the name Fortney Hillman Stark III bestowed upon me. I didn't realize that a name like that was a liability until I went to first grade. And I don't know if anyone has ever wanted to, get beat up in the first grade. Try going in with no athletic ability and tortoiseshell glasses and a copy of the Babysitter's Club book in your backpack and the name Fortney Hillman Stark III. I learned pretty quickly on I was going to either have to change my name or learn to fight. And in my family, there were a lot of things you could be. You could even be religious if you wanted to be, but you had to be a pacifist. And so with my options limited, I was like, okay, what could I call myself? Fish ultimately came out of my initials. I wrote down FHS. I said, oh, that looks a little bit like fish. That's hip. That's cool. That's edgy. I bet a boy named Fish doesn't get bullied. which was a very bad misreading of the situation. But I adopted the name and committed to it in a way where, other people thought it was adorable, and then they thought it was interesting, and ultimately they realized I wasn't giving up on it. And so I've been Fish to everyone in the world since I was 6. Yeah, I tell that story a lot in my work with young people, and now as a humanist, because I think it reflects something that I think is both deeply humanist and deeply human, which is that we don't have control over a lot of things in our lives. We live in a world where there is a lot that is determined by forces outside of our control, especially today in ways that can feel really dispossessing. The one thing we have control over is our identity, who we are, how we show up, how we define ourselves. I think it's important for everyone to understand that that's something that you always have the ability to radically define and redefine in a way that can never be taken away from you. Of course, we all, so we all choose our identity, in some ways more radical than changing your name, in some ways less radical, but all the same. To me, one of the things that draws me closer to humanism and that humanism has to offer to people is this relentless commitment to self-determination. The idea that everyone has the ability to decide the terms on which they write their own story.
And that's, you anticipated my next question, which is how do you identify as a humanist? And also, in that identification, you are now responsible in many ways for identifying a whole organization. So if you can tell us about what is the AHA's mission, what it has been and what it's growing into, and how you would like to see that develop.
So this is a great question, and I often get asked to try and explain what humanism is in my role, which is challenging because, the old joke, 2 Jews, 3 opinions? The humanist version of that joke is, 2 humanists, 4.5 opinions, and an epistemological debate on the nature of belief. So what I say to define humanism, if I've got 5 seconds in an elevator, is humanism is for people who believe in the golden rule but not in God. If I have a few more seconds, I say that really humanism is about believing in people. It's about believing in human worth, and that humans are born with incredible and equal worth and dignity without ever needing to be saved or redeemed to earn it. It's a belief in human potential, the idea that there's no problem that humans can't solve and no truth that we can't uncover as long as we live in societies that protect the right to think freely. And it's this idea of human responsibility, that the highest good, our highest moral obligation, is not to some abstraction or tradition, but instead helping other humans live lives of freedom and flourishing. And so the AHA has stood as the voice of humanism in the US for over 80 years now. We are coming up on our 84th anniversary on April 1st. I don't know who decided the cruel joke of founding an organization on April Fool's Day makes it really hard to coordinate communications. We can't make any big announcements around the founding because people will be like, are you joking? But over those 80 years, we've been many things. We've been a proving ground and a convening space for some of America's greatest rebels, right? We've had Kurt Vonnegut editing the magazine. We had John Dewey convening our first convention back in 1933 that helped shape the Humanist Manifesto. We've been, champions of the folks who helped establish Planned Parenthood and Ms. Magazine, or chaired the March on Washington, or created the Dodd-Frank banking bill that protected us until it got repealed by the GOP from big corporations. And so, we've tried to build humanism into something people can belong to, believe in, and fight for by articulating what it is, building community and positive identity for people who believe in the principles of humanism, and advocating for our own civil rights in the courts and in Congress. I can talk more about some of these programs, but ultimately the idea is to not just advance humanism as a belief system for the tens of millions of Americans, who are broadly non-religious, or broadly non-theistic, I should say, and broadly progressive, and offering that value, that gift of identity, of knowing, as I think we all know, that beautiful feeling of, you know, how it felt when you realized there was a word for what you believed, and then that connected you to other people. And ensuring that in a world where, yeah, there are people who want to constantly relitigate this idea of religious pluralism and freedom of conscience in America, that ultimately we live out, and I don't think we should be shy about claiming this, that we live out the dream of the founders, that America continues to be a nation that, as George Washington would say, provides bigotry no sanction, and affords intolerance no opportunity. So that's what we work on.
I especially appreciate, we talked about this somewhat yesterday as well, I especially appreciate the positive perspective of this. And I appreciate that the AHA has been doing that for almost 20 years now, in a sense that, this positive identity and value system. And I was sharing that when my husband and I were married at Brooklyn Ethical in 1982, we got a whole speech about what ethical culture is not. It's not this, it's not that, it's not the other thing. And we said, well, what are you? And I think for generations of AHA folks, that was also the case. And understandable if they were leaving something, if they were refugees something. I know, Vincent, you're still active with refugees from more traditional religions today, but certainly a lot of that was going on. So the message was, you're okay here, you're safe here, because it's not that. So I've really appreciated the emphasis on what we are and what's positive about it. And also that it's not anti-religious or anti-theist or atheist. Well, there's a lot of atheists, but
there are plenty of atheists.
But also, I mean, for example, when we are tabling at the Parliament of the World's Religions, we had a table in Chicago last year with both the American Ethical Union and the American Humanist Association. You have a rainbow of pamphlets. Are you Jewish? You may also be humanist. Are you Christian? You may also be humanist. Are you Muslim? You may also be humanist. So can you speak some more about that, sort of that umbrella or that embrace of people who don't need to leave their tradition, but sort of acknowledge another part of themselves that they may be keeping secret from others?
Absolutely. I originally found my way into the secular movement by way of my father, who I think many folks know as the first openly atheist member of Congress. But I deepened my commitment to humanism in particular, really through my own work studying the humanistic psychologists as a developmental psychologist, getting my training at first the Yale Child Study Center, then the Harvard Graduate School of Education. And part of what you get when you read folks like Spock and Dewey and Maslow and Carl Rogers is a recognition that really we can't be. Vonnegut said, we are healthy only insofar as our ideas are humane, right? We can't have that base of self-confidence, of wellness, of courage, without a strong self-concept. Knowing who we are, what we believe, what ties us to other people, what our identity is. That is the foundational building block of emotional and mental wellness. And the fact is, we're seeing there's no surprise that we're seeing a decline in mental wellness in this country, as we're seeing a decline in group membership in anything, right? Whether it's something like ethical culture or traditional religion or a bowling league or a political party. And so our focus is about trying to build that positive identity for people who have long worried that they don't belong anywhere to belong to. And you cannot build a positive identity simply off of reactivity or negativity, what you aren't. And believe me, there are plenty of things that humanists aren't. We're not Elon Musk, right? Believing that empathy is suicidal.
You
right?
anticipated my next thing about empathy. Thank you.
We're not, and we're not people who believe that there are theistic explanations for world events or for ethics or for, and I think we can work in coalition with those people. I think we've got. I say I'm not anti-religious. Some of my best friends are religious. We can work in deep coalition and partnership with people who may believe deeply in the idea of an all-knowing or interventionist deity, but also believe in social equality, freedom of conscience, and the dignity of all people, as as some of our Catholic friends or our Jewish friends or our Muslim friends do. And so ultimately, a lot of the work that we have to do at the AHA is clarifying humanism. I don't like the fact that when you go to the AHA's website and you click on what is humanism, you get about 8 or 9 different definitions. We're going to be cleaning that up in the next couple months. There are a lot of, it's one of the mold under the wallpaper that you find out about when you inherit an 88-year-old house. But as we try to crystallize this definition of what is humanism in a way that helps especially people who are really searching for meaning and purpose right now, which is more and more and more of the country than you'd expect. About 40% of people say on a daily or weekly basis, they're searching out content and answers to give them a higher sense of purpose and meaning. 40% of people are looking for something more to be connected to on at least a weekly basis. As we continue to build that framework of saying this is who we are and what we believe, and this is how adopting a humanist belief system can give you some of that courage and empowerment and community, we have to be framing it, I think, in a positive and welcoming way.
I think perhaps one thing that may be contributing to that misunderstanding or misconception that the AHA or even you might be anti-Christian, which we know is not true, but I have heard it said. And so I think what might contribute to that misunderstanding is one of the campaigns that you have going, and that is to address Christian nationalism. And so Rachel Deitch, who's joined you, has a campaign. So this might get us into some of the campaigns that the AHA is going. But the perspective on that is, let's be concerned that there is a Christian nationalism and a move towards a theocracy that is dangerous. So I'm wondering whether that might be some of the misunderstanding, and if you could address that.
Well, I think it's important let me put it this way. I don't think that the world humanists are looking for is a one where everyone believes the way we do. I don't think that's the goal of humanism. I don't think that's the goal of the AHA, certainly not as long as I'm running it. I think that ultimately what humanism is looking for is a world where everyone has this, this Jeffersonian ideal of freedom of conscience. This idea that everyone has the ability to choose for themselves the sources from which they derive meaning and ethics and value. That no one is allowed to engage in the paternalistic sanctimony of telling you where your beliefs about what is good and right should come from. As Unitarian Universalists, we call it the free and something, the free and open search for meaning. I'm not a very good Unitarian Universalist, but I am one. Free and responsible search for meaning. Anyway, and so, we do very strongly stand against Christian nationalism in the US. And for that matter, we work with the members of Congress that we've convened in the Congressional Free Thought Caucus to make sure that the State Department is using its religious freedom arm to work against Islamic nationalism, right? In countries where people that are not of the Islamic faith find themselves oppressed. Whether it's in America or anywhere else, what's important to us is protecting people's freedom to believe. That ultimately, I think, is what makes us humanist. This idea that we believe people, again, have the right to choose where they draw their meaning from and chart the course of their lives within shared ethical frameworks. And the thing about shared ethical frameworks is that they have to encompass shared beliefs rather than imposing one parochial belief system upon everyone who lives within that framework.
So that's one program, and I know an email popped up before I left home about registering for a course that's being offered. So you offer courses, you have online courses, you also have sort of on Zoom and in-person courses. Tell us some more about all the different resources that are sort of under that umbrella of the American Humanist Association, sort of, like when you go on the website, not just, pulling the wallpaper off, but the drop downs on all the different resources.
So, the AHA, we've got an incredible staff team of 17. These are people who I'm getting emails from them today. These are people who work nights and weekends to try and figure out how we promote humanism in the US and how we defend the rights that we have and defend our country against Christian nationalism. Our work really operates across a few planes. The first is helping people who don't know that they're humanist find out about humanism and adopt it as a meaningful framework for their lives. The second is about deepening humanist leadership, giving people the tools to be humanist clergy, humanist leaders in their communities. And the third is really our political work, to make sure that we're building a country where humanists are safe and welcome and humanist values are reflected. The political work is sometimes the easiest and most fun to talk about. We've got a great team of lobbyists who are on Capitol Hill building relationships. We've established the Congressional Free Thought Caucus, which has grown now to an interfaith coalition of over 24 members of Congress, working to create a society where we believe in the separation of church and state. We have a legal program where our team has been able to go all the way to the Supreme Court and really defend the right of everyone to be able to worship freely and also exclude themselves from worship without favoritism or without discrimination in America. So we're continuing our work with the Congressional Free Thought Caucus. We're doing more and more in states around the country. So things like trying to stand up against school vouchers that unaccountably funnel our tax dollars into religious private schools, and stand up for things like the healthcare sharing ministry transparency, saying you can't offer people fake health insurance under the guise of religion that doesn't cover the things traditional health insurance covers, doesn't pay out the claims it says it will pay out, and not face transparency because it's owned by a religious entity. And we're building an incredible legal center that is going to be designed to, I know there are some people who bristle about the idea of humanism as a religion, but the fact that we've achieved legal standing as a religion in the US means you can't discriminate against a humanist for what we believe any more than you can discriminate against a Jewish or a Muslim person for what they believe. And so we're going to be taking on very directly the problem of deep discrimination against humanists in, especially in deep red America, and housing and healthcare, and especially employment and child custody. In our work where we're thinking about welcoming people in, we maintain over 236 local groups, chapters, and affiliates around the country. I don't know if BSEC is one. I hope BSEC will consider becoming one.
We are affiliates.
We're affiliates, great. So BSEC is one of those affiliates, and we provide, and we're actually basically tripling our organizational capacity to provide support for those local groups over the next few years, because we know that people are going to be looking for places to come as they lose trust in the institutions they thought were going to protect them, as they look for a place where they can come together and resist what's happening right now. And we also are starting to build out more programs in our communications and in our education department that are geared at bringing people into humanism rather than talking about humanism to people who are already there, because humanists love to talk. But we do most of our talking to each other. And so in fact, we one of the things I did when we came in, we canceled a line of programs in the education department that were attracting the same 20 people every time to talk about the same things. We have to move aggressively away from the circular conversations that only involve the same group of people who are already deeply committed, and start talking outwards to new people in their language. I mean, and so we are, the most exciting thing about this work, we're right now working to build out a series of online offerings in the podcast and short form video, I'm talking about TikTok, guys, network, that is designed to compete with what we call the manosphere, right? The right-wing media empire that they've created. And by the way, you know, the secret of the right-wing media empire, which is 100% the reason we've seen, especially this rightward drift among young secular men. The whole thing relies on them saying, hey, come here, I'm going to tell you a secret. I'm going to tell you what they don't want you to know. I'm going to tell you the things you're not allowed to think, not allowed to believe. I'm going to let you in on this. And we have to claim the fact that humanism is the intellectual tradition of America's greatest rebels. Whether it is the people who have birthed second wave feminism, or were incredible abolitionist leaders, or who revolutionized art and music and literature, or invented the personal computer, most social movements in America had humanists at the center of them, empowering them. And so we're going to be telling that story about those humanist leaders and the way they've moved America aggressively over the years.
So you you mentioned, you sort of dropped humanism as a religion and humanist clergy. And I hope that all of you remember that last month we had Vanessa Gomez-Brake here, and she was sitting where you're sitting. And of course, she is an associate dean at the University of Southern California. She's a humanist chaplain, and she sits on the AHA board.
That's right.
So Vanessa is part of that. There is the Humanist Society, which falls under that umbrella. And that's where some training goes on. In fact, Vonda, you mentioned that the AU has their assembly at the end of July in Philadelphia. The AHA has their conference at the end of June in Chicago.
That's right.
And Kevin Jago and I will be co-facilitators in a workshop on celebrations, officiants from life passage ceremonies. And Rabbi Adam Shalom and I will also be on a panel. So there's a lot of things going on at the end of July in Chicago, including your wedding.
Oh, no, that's next year.
Oh, that's next year.
Yep.
Oh, I thought it was this year. Okay.
No.
Anyway, at any rate, mazel tov in advance. But anyway, a lot going on there. And the Humanist Society sort of trains and certifies chaplains, officiants. So tell us a little bit about that.
Yeah, so the Humanist Society is one of several organizations we're really lucky to have under our umbrella that recognizes that whether you are a theist or not, there are times where you need what some people in the chaplaincy space would call spiritual care, what I sort of call emotional and existential care, right? There might be times around end of life or a big life transition where what we really need is someone to talk to about meaning, purpose, destiny, about all mortality, all the things we think about when confronting big changes and transitions in our lives. And so through the Humanist Society, we've trained hundreds and hundreds of clergy in the humanist tradition, folks who legally are performing weddings, they're performing a celebration of life and end-of-life ceremonies, they're working in hospitals and prisons and colleges across the country. And these folks are people who have stepped up to promote humanism and are doing some of the best work in our movement, to share about what humanism is and what it can offer to people broadly, and bring new people and especially young people in. You know, Humanist UK, which is humanism is a far broader and stronger movement in the UK. They will tell you that their biggest vector of growth is through weddings. That people come to a wedding ceremony that's performed by a humanist officiant, they see what they do and they're like, oh, what is that? I should learn more about that. And so one of our goals is to aggressively grow the number of celebrants and chaplains that we have, holding out humanism as an offer of hope to people who are in some of the most joyful or toughest times in their lives. If you all are interested in becoming humanist celebrants, of being able to solemnize marriages or perform baby naming ceremonies or create secular events for anyone who's going through a meaningful transition, I would encourage you to check out the Humanist Society. We'd love to get you trained, certified, and able to be there in those moments of joy and sorrow in people's lives.
And also because I have a personal connection to it through my daughter, Emily Newman, there's the Center for Education. So some of you know that the Humanist Institute was around for many years, and it was formed out of, no longer exists, but the North American Committee on Humanism. The Humanist Institute was a place where I was trained there as a clergy leader, and then it became the Center for Education under the AHA. And so check that out. There are so many programs, online courses. It's just a lot percolating there as well. So I'm going to open it up for a Q&A in a moment, but I want to ask you something that we talked about, and those of you sitting here who are on Brooklyn Ethical's board know that we had a conversation about Trump 2.0 and what it means for nonprofits. I attended a conference on Thursday that was called Law, Religion, and Civil Society in These Challenging Times. And the person who was there from the National Council of Nonprofits said there's not a single sector of nonprofits in this country that has not been impacted by one or more of Trump's executive orders. And so what strategies is the AHA looking at? And is there a tension there? Are we all on high anxiety? How are you folks addressing it there?
We should be on anxiety. We elected a madman who believes that he has, and I want to be clear, I think Trump believes he has a divine right to rule, not because he believes in a Christian deity, but because he sees himself as God. Trump believes that dissent is sin in his warped view of the world. And he believes that he has the moral duty and power to wipe out anyone or any entity that is insufficiently aligned with his megalomaniacal views. There is no rational way to try and appeal to his whims, like trying to reason with a tantruming toddler, right? At the end of the day, the only thing you can do in a situation like that or this is hold the line. We are, as the AHA, we are not quieting down. We are not going anywhere. And frankly, we have raised more money than we've raised in a long time by being boldly and profoundly furious about what Trump is doing and spelling out the ways in which we think it is degrading to humanity and the human spirit for him to be reacting in this way. You've got Donald Trump, Elon Musk, and JD Vance right now trying to talk, and they're getting their cronies like Jordan Peterson to talk about suicidal empathy. The idea that empathy is the weakness of Western civilization, that it is a sin, that it is something that is killing us. And what we have to understand is that that's not true, right? I used to build programs on empathy for children and research the impact of development of empathy. Empathy encourages pro-social behavior. It gives us, it is associated with better emotional control and better mental health. Empathy makes us happier and makes the world safer. The only reason they would tell you that empathy is suicidal is because empathy and the kinds of values we have around human dignity and human equality are antithetical to their political project. They are trying to build a world where billionaires can consolidate economic power and the religious right can consolidate cultural power. And the only way they're going to be able to do that is by doing things that are offensive to the human consciousness, doing things that degrade human dignity and worth, and that ultimately interrupt people's ability to live their lives as they choose. And the only way they can do that is if we let them get away with it. If we don't speak up loudly enough and oppose them strongly enough. And so they're telling us, they're trying to shame and delude us into turning off the parts of our brains that naturally are repulsed by cruelty, that naturally have an allergic reaction to unfairness. And so we have the opportunity. They've given us this golden door that is just opened in front of us. They have made empathy, which is one of the most natural human reactions that we have, an act of revolution. And so if we can say loudly and clearly, we reject the idea that people don't matter. We reject their attempts to divide us by identity. We reject their attempts to try and distract us while they cut our benefits to put more profit in their pocket. We reject those attempts not because we're oppositional to whatever political party or whatever movement they're a part of, but because we believe in something bigger, which is the idea that everywhere should be a place, but especially America should be a place where people should be free to believe what they want to believe, and where as long as we have wealth, everyone should live in dignity. And we can't back down an iota because the drastic changes they want to make rely on people backing down. Are we holding ourselves out and assuming a little bit of risk in doing that? Absolutely we are. And that's something that I've been clear on. They could decide to come and shut us down. We're following the law. There's nothing we're doing that's illegal. We're very clear about crossing our T's and dotting our I's. But that hasn't stopped them. That doesn't stop them from deporting legal permanent residents to El Salvador or wherever the hell they want to put them. So the best we can do is say, what is the tradition of humanism? Tell us about how to react in these times. I mean, what did Frederick Douglass and A. Philip Randolph do when faced with the brutality of racism and discrimination in America? What did Emma Goldman do when trying to establish legal and political equality for women in America? At the end of the day, a lot of folks were willing to get arrested. I think of Emma Goldman being arrested here in New York repeatedly in 1917, 1919 for distributing birth control. I put that quote in there for a reason. People only have as much liberty as we have the intelligence to want and the courage to take. In the humanist movement, there is a lot of intelligence to go around. We get spotty on courage sometimes. Now is not the time for a deficit of courage. Now is the time for us to look back at the tradition of humanism and the fact that so many of the people that we revere have been intentional boundary pushers and barrier breakers, and find the deepest well of courage within ourselves that we can and channel it towards reminding people how wrong and antithetical to the American spirit everything that's going on is.
Great. Okay. Well, I'm glad that you're beefing up your legal department. And I know that I'll be looking for your resources just as I look to the UUA for resources and the National Council on Nonprofits, because every time there's another executive order, I see some more information coming out on that. And because you mentioned Frederick Douglass, he was in Rochester. I grew up outside of Rochester, and one of his famous quotations is, agitate, agitate, agitate.
Agitate, power concedes nothing without a demand. Yep. He's so perfect for these times.
He is perfect.